Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another Presscast. I'm your host Farbs, and today I'm very honored to be joined by Professor Emeritus Beau Grosscup, political scientist and author of several books about which we will be talking details. In this episode, we will be also be talking about the pandemic situation in the United States and across the world. We will talk about the US-China relations and much more, so don't miss out. But before we start, don't forget to click on the subscribe button and the like button. And in case you're listening to us on SoundCloud, don't forget to follow us. So if you're ready, let's begin. Professor Grosscup, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you with us. And so just to better frame this little conversation, let's start with a bit of your background history. Could you tell us, and me and my audience included, a little bit about your your work or your life achievement? I will get into the discussion and ask you more questions, but please start.
Well, I'm a PhD in political science, international politics from the University of Amherst, Amherst, a long time ago. But my major work is on the subject of terrorism, in particular state terrorism. And in that way, I'm sort of a dissident voice relative to the dominant perspective that comes from what I call the terrorist nations, which are basically what I call the bombing nations, which I've written about in a book called Strategic Terror, the Politics and Ethics of Aerial Bombardment.
I think it's a 2006 title. Am I right?
That's correct. And in which I go against the common and dominant narrative in which I basically argue and lay out how it is that through the use of strategic bombing theory since World War I, the predominant Western nations, have come to use air power as the primary instrument of war because it's very clean for pilots to drop bombs and shoot missiles and of course now drones from far away. And of course, it's very dirty on the ground. Something they refuse to acknowledge because they always talk about precision bombing. In fact, they talk about smart, and now they use the term precise and brilliant weapons from afar. So for me, particularly since strategic bombing theory admitted the developers of it, the for-profits as they were known, in World War I, said it was a strategy of terrorism by bombing the civilian cities and getting the enemy nations to sue for war very quickly. So that was what I consider to be my capstone project. Before that, I got interested in terrorism because of the way it was used politically, or at least the threat of terrorism was used politically in Western democratic nations to basically install a more authoritarian government in those nations, starting in Germany and then during the 70s and the 80s in Britain and in Western Europe. And then, of course, with the Reagan administration in the United States. I call it authoritarian democracy. That's the concept I use. And using the threat of terrorism, put fear in people's minds. And so that's really what my basic projects have been, and in U.S. foreign policy, besides, in general, besides the concept of terrorism. So
Professor,
after 9/11,
I'm sorry to jump in, but what I've noticed is that your three first books are on terrorism and U.S.
Yeah,
militarization, but your last two titles are, it's like the first one is if a Rebel Without a Clue. It's like a self-memoir. It's a journey about yourself. I haven't had the chance to read it, but I've read about the summary, and then I know it's a different topic than all that, terrorism. And
yeah.
the other one that you have done in collaboration with other people, Tell Them What You Want. So what happened? And then, between that one, 2006 to
Mhm.
2020 and 2021, there's a long gap. What happened? And then what was this whole transformation happening? How did it happen?
Well, I retired from academia for one thing, and the Rebel Without a Clue is, as you know, is six short stories that are actually almost true. That where I try to use my sense of humor, which many people don't really respect, but that was a fun project in my post retire during my post retirement period. The recent book, which I co-authored with my 65 years of friendship African American woman friend, um, was really a project that is dear to my heart because of her and what she went through and what she, triumphed over. We grew up. The book starts where we meet. She's up climbing in a tree, and she's 6 years old, and I'm 10, and we've been friends ever since. And so when she asked me, you know, knowing that I'm a writer and knowing that she's not, she wanted to publish her story. She thought it would be of interest and importance, particularly to young women and women in general, but also to everybody in terms of an inspirational story. And since I know her, and even though we were going to come up against the issue of cultural stealing, I can't remember the term right, appropriation. I'm white, she's black. She said, "I know you'll get it right, Beau." And so I interviewed her for 2 weeks, and then used, the recordings to write the book with her help, obviously. So, it's really, these are labors of love. Not that I'm not interested in keep up with, but with international politics. It's just that I did write another article on cluster munitions, which appeared in Monthly Review magazine. But so I've kept up with these issues, obviously, and my trip to Iran in 2017 heightened, my interest in your country and its place in the world and
We
the
will get to
threats that were.
that. We will get to that.
Okay, all
This is
right.
part of my
So anyway,
questions.
that
But
if that helps you, I just moved on to for personal reasons to these other projects.
Mhm. So, as I noticed, terrorism and militarizations of United States are not the only issues of your concern, because I read I think it's your last Facebook post, and it was about issues of race, just like the book that you talked about, and it's a pretty
Hmm.
interesting, mm, repost that you have here. Allow me to read it for the audience. One of the problems is that slavery is taught as the history of Black people and not the history of white people. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, that was not my post, but I was responding to that post because I liked it because what it does is that uh, it points out that history is, written um, almost exclusively by the winners and the people with power. And so that the emphasis, has been on what happened to black people, black slaves, in the slavery period of of the U.S. And by the way, the post-slavery period it's true of Jim Crow as well, and it's true today. And yet there's nothing, there's no emphasis on the issue of, well, why did white people do this? Why was in a country that allegedly everyone is free, build a nation built on slavery of a different race, and also post Civil War continue to oppress the people of a different race when allegedly it proposes to be a society based on equal opportunity and freedom of choice and all the things that liberal democracies are supposed to be about. And yet, why did white people do this, basically, and what was it about? And that hasn't been explored in a way that it in common curriculum. There are books about it, but they don't make the news, or they don't make it into the classrooms.
Professor, maybe now's the time to go back to that part about your trip to Iran. So I'm just curious, how did it all happen? I mean, out of all the places on earth, as an American, how did you end up in Iran? And then what did you do there? Well, I know, but could you please tell this to the audience?
Well, I was invited out of the blue, quite frankly. It seemed to me, I asked.
Does an email popped up in your inbox and like that?
Yeah. I had no connections in Iran at all. I had never even been to the Middle East. But as it was explained to me, the 6 people that they invited to attend and listen and learn and talk, the common thread was people who had proven to be dissident voices on the issue of U.S. imperial policy towards Iran in the post-Shah period, and that they also seemed to know something about my interest in the importance of narrative and discourse on human relations, on human rights. And of course, that was the theory, that was the thesis of the conference that I attended. And so I was very happy to go for lots of reasons. And I hope that I did myself proud.
How long did you stay in Iran?
Well, the conference was 4 days. I stayed a week because I had never been
Tehran,
there.
only in Tehran?
No. You're going to ask me that. Esparta?
Isfahan?
It's a city in the north. It starts with an E. It's a major cultural center. Yeah, and actually, one of my short stories in the Rebel Without a Clue is about my trip to Iran. It's humorous. It's maybe, I don't think it's disrespectful to Iran, but in fact, it's satire to some degree.
I definitely need to check out your book.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, you've been here, so we have no access to, to your world, and then so I just have to stick to your narrative. So I'm gonna love it anyways. So tell me about the food. Did you try the food here? Did you like the food?
Oh yeah. I'm not a big meat eater, but
same here. Tell me you're a vegetarian.
When I do eat meat, I like it rare. I didn't find that in Iran. But yeah, no, the people who accompanied us, Ali, who a lot of people named Ali, was wonderful, and the organizers of the conference really took care of us in terms of food. Too much food in many ways, but excellent. No, I love Mediterranean and food from that area. So, I was in heaven, really.
Okay. Hope to see you here again after this whole
Yeah, I'd
pandemic
like
thing
to
is
come back.
over.
It's a long way. It's a long way, but hey,
Yeah, why
they
not? I
have these
mean,
fast airplanes now.
let me tell you my secret. Whenever I have to fly, I take these sleeping pills. Man, they work wonders. So I don't even realize what's happening. So just go there, sleep. Somebody wakes me up to eat, and then I again go back to sleep and wake up and I'm there. So I think this that's the best way to
Well,
travel.
the pandemic really has cut off any
Hmm.
travel that I do that way. Just I'm a very healthy person, but I still I want to stay healthy.
Yeah. So how's the situation like there where you are? I mean,
Well, for me, and my partner, it's really been pretty easy because we live up in the foothills, Sierra Mountain foothills, and don't have close neighbors. So the only time we had to have contact with people was when we needed to go down and get food. So during the first, let's just say the Trump era of not dealing with the pandemic or dealing with it the way he did or didn't. It was pretty. I was cut off from my son. I didn't see him for a whole year, and I only got to see him for 2 hours when you did see him in San Francisco. Um, and as it's going on, we're still cautious. We're vaccinated, but we still wear the masks uh, in stores, and we don't go to large gatherings. We do get to see some of our friends, at least if they're vaccinated. Now we've got people who aren't vaccinated, and that's infuriating. And I think in this country, it's becoming clear that the division is really the people who have had patience for the rebels without a clue, if I can use that language, who don't get vaccinated, who have protested masks and all that stuff. We don't have any patience for them anymore, and it's coming to a head. The good thing is that corporate America, or as we call it, the ruling class, has decided that they want their economy back, and so they basically had enough of the dissident crazies, as they're called, around masks and around So it's politically it's been an interesting but a very disturbing time to find fellow citizens are part of a cult, and that they I mean a cult that's racist and misogynist and now anti-science and
mm,
are willing to do and say anything just to keep their belief system intact.
exactly. I mean,
Very disturbing.
so exactly. I mean, it was for me also watching the scenes of some of the protests in New York and other places, even down in Australia. You know, please help me understand this. I mean, in these developed nations where access to information is way easier than other parts of the world, you can see more instances of pseudoscience. I mean, we have anti-vaxxers, anti-masks, anti-maskers, or whatever you call them, or flat earthers. So why do you think these phenomenons manifest themselves in these developed nations, at least more than the things that are happening? I mean, in my place, at least. I mean, why do you think it's happening like this?
Well, in our country, in the United States in particular, and also maybe Britain, we could say the same. We have a very individualistic political culture, and the basic uh, mantra of the dissidents has been, um, don't. I'm not going to give up my freedom. Uh, whether you're trying to suggest I have a vaccine or wear a mask, it's all about freedom. and it's all about individual freedom. And they refuse to recognize that things change in a public health crisis. They refuse to acknowledge that when you live in a liberal democratic society, that there's always tension between individual liberties or rights on the one hand and public safety on the other. And there's always an attempt at a balance between the two. And they have taken the theory of individualism to its ultimate, in fact, one could say almost to its anarchistic plateau, in the sense that they say no, there's not a balance. We shouldn't have a balance between public safety and individual rights. Individual rights are absolute, right? And yet the interesting thing is that when it comes, let's say, to what's happening with the Biden administration, their view of the Biden administration, their argument is that the Biden administration is headed toward public safety with the mandates, for example, and the mask baiting and the vaccination. That they want, that they're going to a society based on the absolute nature of public safety, right? And they're very critical of that, as they should be. But they don't see that when they espouse the same thing, absolute individual rights, they don't, they don't understand, or they don't want to understand, because there's nobody from the people that they so-called respect, we call it the cult leader, who has made the argument about the need for balance. And even if someone made the argument about the need for balance between individual liberties of rights and public safety, they wouldn't buy it. They say, no, I'm the only one that matters. So that's my explanation for what's going on. And unfortunately, we've got powerful political leaders in the now Trump party who are egging them on, even though they're acting as though they understand the balance because they're all vaccinated.
It's very interesting. Very interesting. Thanks for the clarification. I try to understand it. So let's get back to our more serious stuff. And I know that you're also very well versed on U.S.-China relations. And I noticed that you have had an article, I saw it published on one Iranian website, about that, China can surpass the United States, may surpass the United States economically post-pandemic. And could you elaborate on that? I try to understand this.
Well, China, has been on a crash program of development, and interestingly, just this week there's an acknowledgement that they may shift gears and back off that somewhat, because their crash program has been likened to what happened to Japan in the early 80s, in which they were the Asian nation that was threatening the United States economic superiority at the time. And then if you take high risks and you abandon, as both China and Japan have done, you abandon what you do best, which is long-term planning. And it's called the Asian model of capitalism. If you abandon that, there's a price to pay. And so if you're looking at, you're paying attention to what's happening only on the stock market, and then you have a case like this real estate company that basically crashed a lot of stock markets for a period of time. Oh, that's a warning signal. And it seems as though Xi Jinping has taken that, what I've read, has taken that warning and said, oh, okay, we're going to start to back off this crash program and basically get back to what we're doing in order to save our particular position and economy. What we've had, what we've had over the last several decades is really a a battle, what they call the battle of capitalisms, in which you have three models. You have the U.S. model, which is the individualistic model, and privatization, the neoliberal model, and you have in which you privatize all the social programs. You know, you put them back in the hands of the private sector, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's really so our social network, has disappeared basically. And then you have the European model, which you have more of a protection of a safety net. And then you have, the Asian model, which, is long-term planning. It's more thinking about the nation as a whole first, as opposed to the individual. That's the primary difference between the Asian model and the American model, is that in the United States model of capitalism, as the individual goes, so goes the nation. In the Asian model, they're just the reverse. As the nation goes, so goes the individual. Well, that's a flip-flop. And I think China has used that model, except that they've sort of moved away from it to some degree over the last couple of decades with this crash program that now has left, lots of, even though they have a lot of people there, they have more rooms. They have more real estate with apartments and whatever that are empty, and that is really a problem. So, and that's really, to get back to the overall subject, that's really what's coming to a head now with U.S. and Chinese relations.
Professor, maybe my last question. I'd really love to keep you here, but time constraints. So my last question would be on Afghanistan, if you may. So have you been following you have certainly been following the developments. So I want to hear from you your analysis of the reason why the United States left so abruptly. Was it well thought of? I mean, was it part of the plan to leave so abruptly and then leave that vacuum for the Taliban to come and fill the vacuum? Or was it just one big mistake, that they didn't know this is going to happen?
But they didn't know that the withdrawal was going to happen, or that there were going to be
that that the Taliban will take over the country in like 3 days.
Oh, well, I don't think they knew that immediately. Obviously, they would wish it would be different, but it was pretty clear, and people have said this for a long time. The people that you're dealing with on your side, which is the Northern Alliance, for example, in the government, backed by the Northern, they're on most issues, they are as difficult, or they are as outrageous as the Taliban on issues of women. And Afghanistan is a patriarchal society, and so it doesn't matter who's in power, women are going to not do so well, and people who support men who support women are not going to do so well. But on that issue, on the issue of the withdrawal, and it goes back to China. It's directly related to China. If you'll remember, the Obama administration pivoted U.S. foreign policy toward the Pacific. And in my analysis, first of all, Afghanistan was a losing proposition in terms of winning. The only people who were winning were some corporations with the who were hiring this private army and sort of rebuilding. So corporations, particularly more arms manufacturers, were making big money, but that was all. And so, and then we know that Biden is an acolyte of Obama in terms of foreign policy. So he wanted to get out of Afghanistan, because as what's happening is that he is shifting toward a great power conflict. And the great power conflict includes China and Russia. The problem with Russia for Biden, in terms of, saying, oh, they're the basic enemy, the most enemy of the future, is that with the Putin-Trump relationship, there's a lot of people in the United States who aren't about to hate, aren't about to fear Russia because Trump says Putin is okay. That's not true of China, right? So Biden wanted to get out of Afghanistan because he wanted to complete the pivot to the Pacific. And Afghanistan was an eyesore that was draining not only men and materiel, but even people. It wasn't going to work as an enemy. And what we're finding, and we find statements to this in the sense that both in the media and from political speakers in the Biden administration, is that the only thing that's going to unite the United States population now seems to be either a war or a threat of a war. And China, because of the Taiwan issue, China fits that particular scenario. Having made the Pacific pivot, having set up structures with the UK and Australia, and also setting up a security association with India, Japan, the US, and Australia. You know, institutionally, they're there for this great power conflict. And given the threat, as we spoke about, of the Chinese economy, it makes perfect sense. And they've got the instigator, and that is the conflict, the long-standing conflict over Taiwan, in which the United States has been treating Taiwan as an independent state, in which, in fact, they agreed to under the One China policy decades ago that we wouldn't do that. We've got troops there now. We're going to launch missiles. We're going to put in missiles. And we've got Biden saying, okay, I'm committed to that policy. In the meantime, a former Australian Abbott, a former Australian prime minister, is in Taiwan saying, you know, they're going to attack Taiwan. The Chinese are going to try to take over Taiwan. So for Biden, to go back to your original question, for Biden, Afghanistan didn't matter anymore. In fact, he needed to get out in order to pursue this great power conflict. And it has the advantage economically for our weapons people, because great power conflicts need big weapons. Fighting terrorists, small groups of terrorists, you know, that's not a money-making project, at least not as much as the great power conflict. And then it has the advantage, as I said earlier, that it will either war or the threat of war, as we saw during the Cold War, unifies the American people. Despite all their differences, we have a common enemy that is over there. We can see them. They have big weapons. They're hostile towards us. It's what's called the image of the aggressor, right? U.S. foreign policy is built on always having an image of an aggressor. For a while, your country was the aggressor, by the way. At least, and there still are. I mean, that's how they're viewed. But that's how you're viewed, right?
We're no longer on the top of the list. So should we be expecting that in the next, James Bond movies, the villains are all from China?
Yes, because there's a racial component. Yes, because there's a racial component to it. And you know, if you know about the British relationship to Asia. They in the 19th century came up with the concept of the yellow peril and put a racial component, you know, meaning the Chinese or the Asian yellow people of Asia are a threat to the white Anglo-Saxon world. And so in a way, you know, what we're doing now is moving from the clash of civilizations, the Christian world and the Islamic world, to a racial war between white people and people of the yellow color, who are the major threat. By the way, one of my articles that I'm most proud of is what's called the racial rationale, constructing a theory of international power, in which basically I argue that in terms of international relations, race matters. I wrote that in '78. And I think that, you know, it's coming to the fore again because of the pivot towards the Asia Asian world, and China in particular, who has always been pointed out, whether it be the British or American racist, has always been pointed out, it's the yellow peril to the Western white Anglo-Saxon world.
That was wonderful, Professor. I certainly enjoyed and learned a lot. And, this part of the show, I would ask my guest, being you, to end the show for us. So please give us your ending comments, anything that I probably missed asking you or anything you want to add. So please go ahead.
Well, you asked very good questions, I must say. And so I really want to say to your people, and in particular, that I enjoyed meeting you. I hope to meet you again. I've enjoyed tremendously the insistence or persistence by Iranian media to have me comment on these events. It's been so far a wonderful relationship in that way. That's continued after my week in Iran. So I'll just say that right off. And in particular, I do respect the fact that you respect me as a dissident voice. I don't always agree with Iran, as you know, and the policies, but my focus has always been on, and I think that this is why I'm important, or, like why you invite me, is that you're interested in other people's perspective, not just your own. And I wish my country, I wish our national security state, I wish our political leadership was too. But when you're the imperial power, you don't have to listen to anybody else. You just tell people what to do. At least you try to. And it doesn't always work, thankfully, particularly if we have people who are invited on media to be a dissident voice, to say, hey, you're not living up to your principles. So, in that way, I want to encourage you and really the world, but my country in particular, to continue to, for those of us who are not accepted in the halls of power, or our voices and our ideas are not, I hope you'll continue to listen to us, because there are multiple voices coming from our country. We don't have the biggest megaphone, right? But we're here, and hope you'll understand that.